So welcome everyone. Hello. Welcome to our webinar today. We're talking about intent to revenue, leveraging intent to boost your bottom line. I think a fascinating topic for so many of us, especially across marketing and sales as we all start to work together. I'm Carol Howley. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Exclaimer, and I'm really excited to have you all with us for what we think will be a really insightful and also valuable discussion for everyone here on how intent data can really transform your sales and marketing efforts. So I feel that many of us, especially in marketing and sales, we're being challenged to do so much more with less every single day. And buyers are now taking more time to research. There's so much scrutiny into every potential purchase before people start raising their hand. Fear of messing up has definitely taken over fear of missing out. And it means it's really critical for all of us to focus our resources on the right accounts so that we can save that precious budget for everything we do need to do. I think traditional addressable market and ideal customer profile thinking is no longer enough, and we have to focus not just on the buyers that are in market right now, but also the ones that how do we really know who's in market? How do we know how interested they are? And that's really where we feel intent data comes in. So if buyers are researching and they're only signaling intent once they've actually made decisions, engaging with them earlier in that journey, understanding that intent, and getting there before our competitors do is a really key opportunity for many people across marketing and sales. So I think intent data for us really provides a powerful way to understand what potential customers care about and also when to act. So without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce our two amazing speakers today who will guide us through the opportunities and challenges of using intent data. So we have Paul Gilhooly, who is the VP and General Manager at G2. Paul has a decade of experience leading sales teams and has been instrumental in building high-performing teams across Europe. At G2, Paul helps companies use intent data to drive sales excellence, optimize outbound efforts, and fuel their market expansion. And we also have Lacey Gaitan, who is the Director of Growth Marketing at Optimove, which is a customer engagement platform for B2C marketers. She has more than 15 years of experience and a proven track record of driving market-impacted revenue and very passionate about ABM, MarTech, stack optimization, multi-channel campaigns. So she's going to share a lot around how Optimove uses their intent data to prioritize the accounts, drive messaging, and also enable successful multi-threading. So as we move through this session, please do feel free to ask all your questions in the chat. Our Q&A segment at the end gives us 15 minutes to give the chance to ask those really important questions that you want to do. So without further ado, let's dive into today's topic, intent to revenue, leveraging intent data to boost your bottom line. So just to set the scene, perhaps we start with one of the most obvious questions. Can you tell me what actually is intent data? So can we start with you, Paul? Can you let me know how you define intent data? What's the key sources you found the most valuable?
Yeah, thanks for the nice introduction as well, by the way. That was great. And yeah, when we think about intent data, it can mean different things to different people, but I think the most common definition is that intent data enables you to identify which accounts are researching your products online. And there are different ways you can categorize that in terms of data ownership, in terms of maybe if you're thinking about your own first-party data, which is typically your website or through your tech stack. There's second-party providers, which are people like G2, or there's third-party data ownership as well. And there's a whole host of providers there which are tracking typically on publisher websites and so on. But I think for me, it's more about trying to understand the behavior that is most important. When we look at the intent data space, a lot of it is driven through content consumption. And that's super important to understand. Obviously, G2 is more around product comparisons and being very specific. So trying to understand the behavior and how it relates to your sales cycle. That you mentioned about like the evaluation process, cycles getting longer. Understanding that is super important, because if you've got a long sales cycle, the evaluation process, the research that will go into it will be far longer and will typically have more people involved versus a lower ACV, a more transactional. They still want that external validation. They still will do that research, but typically it's much quicker, and that then changes maybe how you should perceive intent data and the use cases that you're going to be using it for. But really, wherever you land on this, it becomes intent data becomes a mechanism for account prioritization. You're trying to put the odds more back in your favor. You're trying to avoid the pitfalls of guesswork about which accounts I should be targeting at any given moment, not in relation to ICP as you meant, but really focusing on the behavior. How can that start to give you incremental gains? And in terms of like where I've got value, I will just talk about that. Was actually one of the reasons I joined G2. I historically worked for other software provider in a really competitive environment, and while I had strong win rates against my really primary competitor, we knew that when they got to a deal first, they would shape the evaluation in a different way. So when we got a trigger, an alert that an ICP account was doing product comparisons against us and my primary competitor, that was a trigger for me that our outbound, would go. It was go time within the organization. But I suppose said another way, it enabled me to have an answer or a process to say, how am I ensuring that we as a company are not missing out on deals or getting to deals late? And I think that's a good way of thinking about intent data as well.
Amazing. And Lacey, what do you think the biggest opportunity is, and what do you really define as intent?
Yeah, so I think the biggest opportunity, I mean, I think of it in three pieces. So prioritization, Paul's already alluded to this, being able to identify those accounts that are having a spike in intent signals, right? Doing the research on G2. Maybe Sixth Sense is showing that they're showing a lot of intent, right? Understanding who may be in market and being able to prioritize them in your sales outreach. That's a huge opportunity. It's one that we're leveraging today as well. And then if you think about timing, I think you both talked about it. It's so critical, like getting in at the right time and not getting in too late. If you wait for an inbound, it could be too late, right? Your competitor may already be talking to them, right? So if you see those signals early on, as you talked about, Paul, if you have a long sales cycle, if you see them early on, it could be months in advance. If you get in early, that could be the edge that you need, right? And then relevancy. So with the intent data, you can get keywords and topics that they're interested in, that they're researching, and understanding what they're interested in means that you can then cater your messaging and make it more relevant. And so you can break through some of the noise, because we know that there's a lot of messages going out, whatever channel it's going out in. And if you can be more relevant, you could have more success there.
Amazing. That's really great advice. Thank you. And I guess considering the challenges that you both alluded to, and also that we shared earlier around kind of, the buying cycles, the number of people in the buying process, and also the likelihood of the first person winning the deal. Are there any kind of specific metrics that you're really focusing on to reach those revenue goals, and how does intent data play into that? Shall we go to Paul first on this one, then we'll switch around the order?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think we've already mentioned this like notion of being in market, and depending on what research you are led to believe, it's typically anywhere between 5 to 10% of any TAM is in market at any given moment. And even it could be even more difficult in today's economy. But if we believe that, really being able to have a process, have a mechanism to identify these accounts, ultimately is your best way of delivering revenue efficiency. So what I mean by that is, and how it relates to sort of the question around metrics, is thinking about how can you improve win rates? How can you improve ACV? How can you reduce cycle times? In today's economy, those type of metrics is how you go grow your business. I think, again, there's a lot of, the old MQL world of like, if you've got a W revenue, you've got a W MQLs. I think those days are gone, but actually improving conversions. And for me, that's how you should be thinking about intent data and trying to put the odds back in your favor. I said incremental gains around those metrics are super important. And to go like a step further to connect some of the dots, when we think about these metrics, the idea really is, you mentioned about timing. Okay, so in terms of win rates and ACV, if you are getting that timing right and you are dealing with an active buyer and you're the one shaping that evaluation, then typically you will see win rates improve because you are that first to engage, but importantly, first to start really shaping their thinking and what their decision criteria is going to be, their decision process. That's super important. But also, if you're actually engaging with someone that already has a known problem, then you're going to be more likely to be able to sell on real value versus educating them about an unknown problem. And that is typically where you see better ACV versus educating someone and trying to move them from an education phase to a buying phase. And you're really like taking them on the journey. And that's where sometimes you see deal size decrease, or is more difficult to get that larger deal, right? When we think about cycle times, that's probably the biggest one in terms of driving productivity from a sales perspective. And that really just is a simple one, that if I can get my reps spending more time with accounts and buyers that have a material a much higher propensity to purchase, then you'll see cycle times reduce. It's less about education, it's more about the evaluation, it's more about the proof points. And what you see is meetings and a willingness to act just happen so much faster. And that is just, when it all comes together, that is what we're trying to achieve, because yeah, productivity improves, general cost of acquisition improves. But there are other use cases as well that are like churn mitigation, right? And everyone is obviously trying to protect the install base, but we know that especially in today's market, many will either consider alternatives just generally, or be forced to, maybe through the C-suite, the CFO, and that consideration. But intent data is a great way to understand who in your install base might be reevaluating or going to market. And again, it's the same sort of situation. It is being timely and relevant, so you engage at the best opportunity to then deliver more consistent outcomes on that respect. So these are some of the metrics and things that certainly I think about, and I think everyone should be thinking about in terms of considering intent data or sit as part of the revenue org.
No, absolutely. Lacey, do you have anything to add to those?
That was really good. Good inclusive list. I mean, I will just like double click into looking at conversions, right? That's the focus. So I work closely with the BDR team. They're the team leveraging intent the most right now with where we are with leveraging intent. So also the AEs, but looking at conversions, looking how intent is supporting that. That's what I dig into. I'll add one more thing. So I also not only looking at the data, because obviously you can like date and timestamp everything, but also looking at actually asking the team how they're using it in outreach, like actually getting that like anecdotal. That's super important. That's helped a lot. It's helped uncover new opportunities and ways to optimize and make it better.
Absolutely. And I think especially for me, coming from the marketing perspective, when you end up looking at it just being kind of an exponential growth in MQLs and just bringing more and more in, you don't end up, it becomes a bit of a war of attrition, which doesn't help anyone. But it's really focusing on, making sure it's the right MQLs that are the right quality of the right types of people that are also interested, and then treating them in the right way, managing that journey effectively with the right sort of conversations. So, absolutely, the conversions for us is a massive opportunity. I guess moving to a more tactical perspective, how have you activated that intent data within your organization? Lacey, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So right now we're focused on the sales prioritization and insights for outreach that I mentioned earlier. We're in phase 1. So with G2, I'm going to talk a little bit about G2 and 6 Sense. With G2, we're able to see who's visiting our profile, who's researching categories that we're part of, and even who's comparing us to competitors. And you can get, what we basically do is we add an ICP filter to that. We use Zapier and we send Slack alerts to the sales account owners, so they know real time, right? Also for 6 Sense, they are constantly scoring, right? They have an intent score, and they have all of these third-party intent sources. And so once it hits a 6 QA, which is a 6 Sense definition, we actually pass that to sales for prioritization. And so they focus on that account, right? And G2 data is actually also fed to 6 Sense. So you actually can have one combined view. Another thing that we're doing is, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but utilizing the research, so the keywords and the topics. G2 gives you a lot of insights. Using that in outreach and at least being able to formulate relevant message that you think will probably open their eyes and hopefully get a response. And that could be any channel. That could be a sales email, could be related to your marketing, your advertising, anything. Carol, I'm sure you're doing stuff like that. So That's how we have activated it right now. One more thing I will hit on is accessibility. And so we have other tools, like we use SalesLoft for outreach, right? And so all the intent data is also available there. So, you know, it's accessible in different places through their workflow too.
No, absolutely. And yeah, we do very similar things. So a lot of the same things you're doing. And we also look at kind of pulling together our 6sense and G2 intent data to look what we can do for paid social campaigns. So it's kind of a very new area for us that we've started really acting on, but focusing on competitor category keywords, the things that really, the branded keywords that make a big difference for us, and then using all of that and all the information sources to try our best to kind of identify people researching, target them when they're in market, and then also tie that into kind of the journey when it goes through to our sales AEs, really creating that sort of that full journey. So for us, that's kind of a great thing. We use outreach, not SalesLoft, but I'm sure it's almost exactly the same because they're all wonderful, really good providers. So then tying it through, and then we've also, because we obviously an email signature solution, we've actually started making sure that within our outreach and also personal emails, we then use our signatures to kind of pull that dynamic information through and have something really relevant to them that ties through from the previous journey. So depending where they come from, like really making sure we recognize that with the first sort of sales outreach. So that's starting to give us a good opportunity, and tying in gifting and things to kind of really activate that as well has been really helpful. So it's kind of this orchestration. So it's a lot of fun to play with it all. How about you, Paul? Is there anything that you've been doing recently?
Yeah, and love everything that was just described, and I think sometimes that's missed actually, where we're thinking about revenue workflows that go across the technology stack, right? And sometimes that is where the biggest value is. And so just wanted to reiterate and absolutely agree with everything that was said there. I think a lot of this, when we think about generally intent data, is there to bring intelligence to what you do. And like if we think about the marketing channels, it really is a way to improve the efficacy of those channels. I think like an obvious one is LinkedIn. It is incredible reach and targeting, but it's a very expensive channel. So having intent data to really be able to do less with more are very common sort of use cases that we see, certainly with G2. But I think one of the ones that isn't always connected. And I want to talk about sales territories, which I think really builds on what Lacey was talking around. And I definitely advocate, depending on where you're at with your account-based strategy, but sales territories, having really set, defined, named accounts, considerations around volume of accounts to AE based on your sales motion velocity, but actually using intent data as a way to inform those territories. Just like I'm sure in most technology purchases, is that we see a very strong correlation between previous close lost, where buyers come back round and then are in a position to purchase. It's very much like the same way with intent data, and it's a way for you to identify previous buying behavior that can then inform or prioritize which account should be assigning. So that when you set up a territory for a rep, for a team, for a region, the behavioral element across maybe external third-party, second-party data, but also first-party is super important. But then I think what we've got is that workflow or process where you are maybe potentially having triggers or more dynamically assigning ICP accounts that for various reasons have been identified as being in market. Again, for G2, that would be those that are coming on doing product comparisons related to your product category. That is when you're like, okay, they might not have been assigned, but we have a process to say, hey, this account now needs to be acted on, and this is like the workflow. I think that's super important. And then, of course, really there is that, the workflows I think you've spoken about, the traditional outbound, using the different technologies. But one of the things that certainly I've done in the past, and not quite there yet at G2, but certainly looking to do that here, is actually using intent data as a way to complement how we assess our target account penetration in relation to our territories. Because those accounts that you've assigned, you as a business are saying, hey, these are the most important ones, because effectively you're going to be surrounding them from both marketing and sales. And at my old company, using 6sense, what we actually had was a what my marketer called the tap dancer, because he's very creative, but it was this target account penetration process where we had a playbook where we could assess both the reach and then the intent. And it was a 4-quadrant. So it'd be, high reach, high intent, but maybe we don't have a meeting. But if we're seeing we've got good reach, we're getting good engagement in different ways, but we're seeing high intent, like they are actively researching, that would tell us like, stay the course, irrespective of the sales engagement sequence or cadence. That sometimes we go, hey, we've done 21 touches, they haven't responded. So you know what, we're going to recycle this and we're going to come back in 60 days, 90 days. Well, actually, when we do some territory reviews, often you're actually going, hey, no, all of the external data points are telling us that this account is starting to warm up. They're coming to our website. We're starting to see them research on different websites, G2 and otherwise. That sometimes is, no, stay the course. Do not refresh or reassign this account. It's like, continue what you're doing. And of course, how you do that, the efficacy of your messaging, your positioning, that obviously comes into play. But using intent data as a way to measure the effectiveness of your prospecting outside of that pipeline meeting type topics, and just say, hey, how warm is the territory? I think that is sometimes a missed opportunity within organizations.
Absolutely, that's fascinating. Actually, I think we're definitely at fault of doing that sometimes in our organization. You're always trying to, I guess, move on, trying to make sure you make the next sale, you don't miss out on anything, but actually digging through and making sure that you're not missing out on what's already right in front of you is a really great tip. Definitely one I'll be taking away. In terms of biggest challenge, oh, sorry.
Sorry, I just wanted to say, Paul, I love the 21-day cadence is over. Like, let's move on. That just struck, right? Like, if the intent's high, like, keep going. It makes so much sense,
Absolutely. No. And I guess on the flip side, what are the biggest challenges you face in implementing an intent-driven approach? Are there any kind of like recommendations, pitfalls, and how did you overcome them? Lacey, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so with all these awesome new insights that you have, it's more data, right? So one of the challenges with more data, how do you share that? How does the team, the end user, how do they absorb it? Where are they getting it? We talked about these different touch points and workflows, right? So that's where having a really organized CRM layout, it's tactical, right? But having the data, leveraging integrations, we've talked about some of those already today. Like G2 and 6sense, you can see everything in one place, but we also have Slack's real time. For those, some people prefer Slack, some people prefer email, right? And so also looking at your delivery method, right? So we actually use different delivery methods to try to cover the different preferences and how people absorb information. And having that view like 6sense where it combines all of the third-party intent plus your G2 plus your first party. So let's say they're also looking at your website, right? They're also engaging with your assets. Then you get that full view, and then sales can go have plethora of information and really relevant messaging to reach out. And how did we overcome it? Definitely enablement and training. And it wasn't just once, it's all the time. It's periodic check-ins. Every time I meet with the team and I do individual sessions, I learn something new. And it's like new ways that people are leveraging it, right? And so ways that we can optimize. Is there a challenge? And it's just an always optimizing process. Yeah.
Paul, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think there's some basics when you're considering intent data that you can't miss. But actually, some of the points Lacey mentioned, I'm going to extend on what I see as maybe best practice in terms of rolling this out. But at the beginning, most important thing is like validate the data. And I mean that both in terms of quality and quantity against ICP and the desired outcomes you're trying to work. Because I think everyone's going to be saying, hey, conceptually sounds great, but is it the right quality? Is it aligned to an ICP? And is it at the quantity that's really going to, move the needle for you as a business? Because as Lacey indicated, it's a lift, it's time, it's effort. And that really relates to my next point, where certainly I've spent a lot of my time enabling organizations on what is like a good rollout. And I think intent data is like really a technology purchase. Typically, it will do what it say it will do, but the pitfalls are more related to people, process, that change management element. And I think, when we think about that, some of the stuff that I've always worked on is almost multifaceted. I'm a big believer, especially on the sales use cases that Lacey was mentioning. There's this battle of like win the hearts and minds of your team, because you're asking them maybe to change a little bit what they're doing, or at least think differently with some of the data sources that you're providing. So normally we're talking about that you need that senior executive buy-in that can win the hearts and minds and communicate to the field about why it matters to them, why it matters to the business, how this is a better path to attainment. And then from there, I think there's a big responsibility on the frontline managers. Like they are always your multiplier of success. So I always think about how can you bring this into an operating rhythm? So again, I go back to those territories. Is it one-on-ones? How do they, can be incorporated into account reviews or deal reviews and territory reviews? Because that's where you can identify, what's working or where maybe the gaps are, where the missed opportunities are. But certainly a big part of this with anything new is celebrating the wins and modeling the behavior, especially at the beginning, because sometimes everyone's waiting for the deal or the big ACV story, but actually it can be, hey, no, you got that meeting because of this. You wouldn't have got that otherwise. And modeling behavior is super important, because I think in sales, especially, what you're actually trying to achieve is creating FOMO. You want to be able to show, hey, these reps are doing better in these areas because they're following this process and you're not. And when you get that FOMO, oh, it's powerful, because everyone's going, I have to go do this. Like, I'd be mad not to. And that's much easier to work with when you've got those proof points versus, telling the story about why you should care. If you've got those proof points, so having a tiger team or people that are going to really lean in, and then you can go validate it, you should showcase the success stories. That's where you get that positive sort of snowball effect.
No, absolutely. I completely agree with you. And that's certainly something that we've seen. It's that it's really depends on the people, isn't it? It's that enablement, the training, getting everyone on board, motivating them, and the whole, go to market really is a thing now. It's you can't go on your own as any one team. It's, how do you pull everyone together and get all that enablement, training, alignment, and celebrating those success. So we've got just one more question I'm going to ask, and I'm opening the floor for any questions from the audience. So please do pop them into the chat and we'll make sure we get them asked if whatever we can fit in. So do you have any key advice you'd love to give companies starting to explore intent data? So anyone want to jump in? Lacey, do you want to go first?
Sure. I'd say I mentioned this before, but I'll just kind of, I guess, re-mention it. Just check in periodically, like look at the data. You're going to get so much valuable data. I mean, Paul mentioned, okay, we finished the cadence, but you've got this high intent. They're obviously researching. Don't finish it. Like keep going. You're going to have all these new insights, and so investigate all of them and find ways to use it internally. You'll start to see that you have so many different options to use this data. For example, like G2 competitor comparisons, there's a lot of insights that you can understand. Which competitors are they comparing us to the most, right? Like different teams can use these insights. So take them, share them, check in with your teams periodically, because you'll also learn a ton there. Yep.
Well, do you have any good advice?
Yeah, I think if you're exploring or you're starting out, first and foremost, it's try and focus on data sources that you can trust, but you can validate. Because I think that's super important that you're confident in that intent data source. Again, going back to how it relates to the buyer behavior that you've seen, if you can get validation and proof points around the efficacy and how it relates to your go-to-market, that's just going to be a good place to start. But normally what I speak to customers about a lot is, hey, what are you doing today that can be improved with the use of intent data? Because then the lift and the change management is less. So we spoke about outbound and maybe sales engagement tools. I think where reps spend their time is a good actually example of this, that if they're just in outreach or sales loft or whatever tool, most, it's like, hey, bring the intent data in there so it doesn't feel like it's something else or another place to go and so on. So I always just think, like, what are you doing today and can it be improved with intent data? If so, that's probably the place to start.
Amazing, thank you. Right, we've got questions coming in thick and fast. Hopefully I'll get to everyone. So starting at the top, and I'll kind of try and get through all of them. When it comes to sales outreach, do you find diversification of touch points to be the most effective? The person, Colin, who's asking it is sort of saying they try and combine emails and phone calls and LinkedIn touch points. So it's kind of, how do you find that diversification?
I might go here. Do you know what? I think Lacey mentioned earlier about more data. So I might go on a bit of a tangent, but I'm going to bring it back, I promise.
Okay.
And which is, I think both marketing and sales have gone through this journey of more data. On the marketing side, it was, hey, MQLs, because that's all we knew. So it was more MQLs, more gates, more forms, and so on. And that was a mechanism for us to have something to act on and convert. But we were never solving the conversion problem. If we look at sales, I would argue they repeated the same issue, which was, hey, marketing went down marketing automation and sales went down automation with sales engagement platforms, which was, hey, we need more data so that we can send more cadences, more. When actually we weren't solving the right problems around conversions. And again, that's where I think to your opening point, Carol, which was around, yes, ICP, but it's got to be the behavioral element. Because if we can get the timing and the relevancy right, that's super important, because all of these tools and systems are only as good as the data that you put into them. And I think that's the most important. So to answer the question, there's lots of different data points around that, in terms of it. 18, 21 touches. Yes, it has to be multi-channel, and yes, different personas and different individuals will have different preferences. So typically you surround them, is the answer there. And there's different sort of playbooks around that. But yes, it's got to be multi-touch. But all I would say is that's one part of this connected revenue workflow that we've spoken about a few times, and think through about the data, but also the intelligence. Is that driving conversions and improvement around conversions, or are we just falling into the trap of more? And I think in email and in today's world of like AI, it's tough out there on that front, so everyone's getting more emails. So again, who we're going after, how can we be timely and relevant? I think it's definitely the way.
Absolutely, I can agree more. We've definitely kind of what I always say to my team, let's literally wrap them up in Exclaimer so that we have, all around them everywhere you turn. But I think we made a lot of mistakes, definitely over the last few years of marketing and sales, trying to think of every channel in isolation. It's like, well, what's the performance of that channel? What's the performance of that channel? What's the best one? And it's like, actually, when you zoom out and you see it's this whole map of all these different interactions and touch points and people and advertising and different platforms and then communities and, all of that element that, you can influence around the edge, but it's building that sort of web and that network all around people that, really helps to kind of help them consume in the ways that they want to, I think is a really fascinating way of doing it. Did you want to add anything, Lacey? Or?
No, I mean, I agree. Like the multi-threading, making sure that you're covered. You guys both cover that. We do the same thing. You've got your buying committee, and you utilize the data insights and go.
Amazing. I've got a really good question here. How can we connect company level intent data with key decision makers? I think that's what everyone always wants to know. Does anyone want to jump in first?
I'm sure we both have a view. Go on, Lacey.
I can just add. Okay, so what we did. This is a common question. This is something that comes up all the time, right? You're gonna get some information. You're gonna get geolocation, right? And there are some cases where, obviously if it's a known contact, then you'll be able to identify them in certain types of intent insights. But, it's understanding, at least from my viewpoint, I love to hear what you guys think, that this account is researching regardless of who it is, because there's a buying committee, right? There's going to be different people involved, most likely. And that's why you're targeting the right people that you know typically purchase. And you can look at all of your closed won deals, who's purchasing, who's part of, who are the personas, use that data so that you're targeting the right people. And as long as you're doing that, then you should get to the right person, right? I don't think that you have to know exactly who it is. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, and I think this just connects to some of the other things that we're saying. Sometimes because everyone knows that, hey, contact data is so important that they want to start with the individual. I think it comes from the MQL, the contact forms. I mentioned sales, it was contact data, and that was a way to reach more people, and we automated and we could reach even more people. But actually, everything we're saying is that it starts with the account. Because if you can first identify which accounts in market, you've just, improved productivity massively. Yes, from there, and it is a case of, okay, we've got an account, and the common challenge is, well, this is a large account, it's an enterprise account. The geolocation enables you to narrow further. You will typically know which personas are relevant for your, sales motion, or you really should, but then that's where I go back to my point of trusting the source of the data and the type of behavior. There are things with intent data, certainly the content consumption sort of publisher approach is, there can be false positives, if they've read top trends in cloud computing, that might not indicate like a propensity to purchase. Obviously for G2, if someone's comparing one product against another, we would argue that is very much buying behavior that you can really trust. But the idea is that, yes, you've got the geolocation, your personas, who's going to be buying your product. And from there, you've narrowed in your world of opportunity. And that's who you should be thinking about. Okay, that's when your contact data spend should come in and you acquire that data, because if you have the knowledge that there's a very strong likelihood this account is in market, that contact data acquisition cost is well spent versus starting there and trying to pray and spray and go, we're contacting everyone in our territories, but if they're not in market, it really doesn't matter.
Absolutely. And then I guess it really wouldn't be a webinar these days without someone asking a question on AI. And you did nod towards AI earlier, Paul, so maybe that gave everyone a tip off. But what do you think the opportunity is for leveraging AI with intent data? Or are there any kind of trends that you might see in the future that could be coming into the area?
Yeah, I mean, hey, there's definitely AI. I think it's combining the two important things. Automation, it's giving people scale, but ideally it's also bringing intelligence. So there's so many tools out there now in terms of this. And from an account-based example, 6sense, certainly we use conversational email that is enabling us to really do a lot in terms of how we drive pipeline, but surround certain territories, certain segments we're pointing at, and so on. But there's so many other tools out there. I think the caution is very much about that personalized, relevant approach. So thinking through copy and messaging and positioning, I think, is super important. And that's the concern. But ultimately, AI is going to change the game. Certainly how we're thinking about this from a buyer perspective on G2, we have an AI assistant called Monty, and that's really enabling the buyer so you can go in and interact with it. Like, here's my problems, this is what I'm looking at, or you can ask the questions that based on these outcomes or this functionality or this need, what product should I be considering? So we're trying to use AI to enable that research process and enable them really to inform that shortlist, and doing so with a level of confidence, because of course most technology markets today are pretty noisy, and it's tough, and again, you mentioned sort of buyer indecision, fear of messing up. So really trying to use AI for us about enabling that so they can arrive at a really strong shortlist is how we're looking at AI ourselves.
Lacey, do you have anything to add to that?
I'll just add something really quickly. So I think in terms of intent, combining all of the insights and automating some of the actionable, like how to make it actionable, just like you mentioned, conversational email was the first thing that popped into my mind as well, which is taking those high intent accounts and automating outreach, pulling together those insights and maybe automating the workflows, I think, is the one thing that I would add. But Paul covered it really well.
Amazing, great. Just see if I can explain this question very well. So it relates to something you said, Lacey. So you mentioned the importance of understanding how ICs, I think maybe ICs like A's sort of use data. And in the context of attribution and ownership disputes, how do you ensure that ICs are aware of the tools driving pipeline and influencing deals? And, are there any great insights from querying sort of those reps on the ground?
Yeah, so how do we ensure that they're aware of the tools?
Yeah.
So regular enablement and training sessions. Everybody absorbs differently. And so send an email, send a Slack, and it's okay if you do it in both places. Set up a training session. And I even sometimes do one-on-ones. It needs to happen. Paul mentioned like the people process, right? That's a common pitfall. And so it's something that seems so straightforward, but it has to happen periodically. It's not just training, you're good to go. Keep an eye on your usage, keep an eye on how people are leveraging. I even sent a survey a few weeks ago asking how they're using a specific type of intent data, because I want to understand it at a mass level. That would be constantly check in and ask the users. Yeah.
Well, did you want to add anything, or shall I help see if I can squeeze in one last question?
Albeit I'm very tempted to tackle the point around attribution, which is a meaty topic. But certainly, I think for ICs, I would argue that most don't care about attribution if we're talking about first touch, last touch, multi-touch. That is a complex area, and really, I go back to those territory accounts. How can you enable your ICs to fully understand why the accounts that you've assigned are the best fit accounts for them in relation to their success? And then the workflows that you have across technologies is the process to deliver desired outcomes. And that should be repeatable or habitual sort of pipeline, sales cycle approaches, and intent data should be one of those. But I'm not too sure if it's always identifying a tool or a single data source, even though that can be important. I think for an IC, it's just about how do we go make you successful and win their hearts and minds about whether they're being well supported.
Amazing. So I did have one question from someone asking, if you don't have Sixth Sense or a similar platform, and also another question is quite similar in the sense of if you've got Sixth Sense versus Zoom Info. So I guess we probably don't want to dig into competitor comparisons, but funny enough, I think G2 is quite a good place to dig into things like that. But I guess if people maybe, are unsure and don't have a platform, or, want to kind of maybe not invest, is there any ways that they could use intent or start to kind of test out proving that use case?
Yeah. Sorry,
Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah.
Okay. Absolutely. You can send it to your CRM. You can use Zapier to connect it to other data sources. Absolutely. You don't have to have an ABM platform to get started.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Don't think wrong. ABM platforms will indicate maybe where an organization is at in terms of their maturity from an account-based perspective. But most companies do not start with a full-blown account-based platform. Actually, what they do start is, normally it is an overhaul of ICP. It might be starting to arrive at this. We're going to have more defined territories. We're going to have named accounts. They're the normally starting points. And I think that's where intent normally comes in. But if we're talking about activation and how you go convert from intent, yeah, Lacey's right. There's so many ways to connect. Like you can get triggers into CRM, into email, into Slack. This is where you've got to think through your tech stack, but also the behaviors of your sales teams. Like, what are they going to really engage with? But then you've got to, like say, think through your operating rhythm, and that's what I was talking about. Frontline managers, what's the workflows, how repeatable they are? Because typically, the more repeatable a workflow is, the better you're going to be at controlling the variables of success in terms of that consistency, and then that sort of ties into some of the optimization feedback pieces that Lacey mentioned earlier.
Amazing. Just want to say thank you so much, both of you, for all your time, for all your insights. It was absolutely fascinating. I've learned so much today that I'm definitely running away to immediately start trying to bother my teams to put into action. So I'm sure so many people have. If there was any questions I didn't get through, or anything you want to do, I'm sure I'm very available on LinkedIn as a great platform to find me. And I'm sure both of you guys, if there's any way people want to contact you, feel free to jump in. Would LinkedIn be okay for both of you if anyone wanted to have a follow-up?
Absolutely.
Amazing.
For sure.
Great. So yeah, thank you everyone. Thank you to everyone for attending, and thank you both for your time. It's such a fantastic webinar. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having
Really
us.
enjoyed it.
Thank
Thanks for
you.
having me.
Cheers, everyone.
Bye, Brady.